on, Center City Church?
You already know.
Welcome to the podcast today.
Yeah, I have a specially planned welcome. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Mawwiage. Mawwiage is what brings us together today. And if you don't get that reference, then you're young.
Or just old and didn't watch the movie.
Princess Bride.
Yeah, which is a classic.
It is a classic. So.
Merely a flesh wound. Anyway.
That's a different movie, but also a classic.
It's not the same movie?
No, that's Monty Python
That's
and the Holy
right.
Grail.
That's right. All right.
They're both good movies, guys.
Yep.
We're not talking about this at all,
No.
but in high school, we did Monty Python and the Holy Grail as one of our plays.
Oh, wow.
And I got to play the guy who was not dead yet.
Oh, nice.
Which I tried to work in our Dead to Alive series, but it just didn't work. So a little behind-the-scenes bonus feature for you guys today.
So marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a great, marriage messages can be a little bit intense to prepare for, but I just, before we even dive into the content, wanted to talk a little bit about why do a marriage message in this very good series.
So the really kind of even the heart of this series was birthed out of this idea that so many of our people, and so many, not just of our people, but even kind of what I'm sensing in culture right now, marriage is it's just a sensitive topic right now. People are really kind of going through it. You kind of factor in the season we're walking out of. You kind of factor in our current climate politically, our current climate culturally. There's a lot of conversations of stuff that affect marriage, but unfortunately, there seems to be I don't like calling it an attack, but it does seem like to some degree there's a push to marriages, a weight that's being leveraged on marriages right now. So really, as we studied through Genesis, this was an opportunity for us to sit in that moment and say, all right, well, what is God's blueprint? What does it look like to have very good marriages? Because I think for a lot of people, we've settled with good enough and not very good.
Yeah, and I love how you started. You really connected it to the first week of Very Good and this idea that everyone is still unique but united, and that your identity comes from your position as a child of God, made in the image of God, that you bring to a marriage. Would you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about sacrifice, and we'll, if you didn't get a chance to watch the message, like that's a big chunk of the time we spent. But we have to know what God is calling us to as individuals, what the purpose and intention of who we are. And according to what we read in Genesis 1, our intentionality, our purpose, our reason is all found in the heart and mind of our Creator. That doesn't have to be sacrificed at the altar of marriage. I think a lot of people, they think that that's kind of the process. Oh, well, I come to this marriage and now I have to sacrifice my identity and what I feel like God is written in me as a purpose. And I just don't see that, not only in Scripture, but I don't see that working in healthy marriages either.
Yeah, so how do you kind of take, and just knowing that I don't really know exactly what I'm talking about as I ask, but how do you take this idea that you are still coming together and becoming one, and in some ways those purposes do have to align a little bit. I mean, you can't be moving in totally opposite directions. So how do you kind of navigate that process within a marriage? Well,
yeah, I believe that as God has grafted people together, He also grafts purposes together. Mm-hmm. So it's not the sacrifice of a purpose, but it's actually the coming together of two in order to accomplish those things at a higher level, right? Ecclesiastes gives us a great example of this in Scripture, where it talks about how when two work together, it's not that they sacrifice success across the board, but actually that they each help each other succeed at what it is that they originally set out to do. So what it requires from a practical standpoint is a lot of conversation. Mm-hmm. And I know that people don't like that as an answer to a challenge in marriage, but really, what is the purpose that the Lord has placed within your spouse? What is the purpose that the Lord has placed in you? And that conversation within the context of marriage, I mean, it's rare that I find couples that purposes are so unique and so different that they pull opposite ways. 99% of the time, those purposes are drawn together in the same way that God has drawn people together, and He knows, because of the way that He's formed it, if that person is the person that God, has aligned for you in that season, He's bringing purposes together. And I don't think you have to sacrifice purpose.
Yeah, and I feel like for some of us, it even takes doing that internal work of being in a season where so many people have just walked through a lot of challenges. There are a lot of people living day to day who might not even be thinking about what their purpose is, and so doing that internal work to figure out like, what is this that's unique in me, and then bringing that to the table, because some people might not even know right now. It's just literally getting by 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time.
Well, again, I think that's the kind of crux of our series, too. Like, we're trying to move from good enough to very good.
Yeah.
And marriages modeled out of Scripture, marriages that I've seen even in my life that have affected me, where we see really just kind of shine, are marriages where they're individually unique, but yet collectively united and moving forward together in their God-divine purposes.
And then it's awesome because then you have a teammate, like,
Absolutely.
which is exciting.
Absolutely.
And just powerful. The other thing that I've just been thinking about a lot is you talked about how at the very end of Genesis chapter 2, we read that Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed. And I don't want to get into the physical aspect of that, but that reality that so many of us are wearing so many different layers and trying to be who the people around us, who we think they want us to be. What does it look like to be in a position where you can just totally be yourself and be vulnerable?
Well, it's kind of tough within today's climate because we have so many false perspectives of vulnerability, right? So I want to make sure that we kind of start that conversation from a commonality that says life has never been intended to live without filters. This thought that I am truly me when I can remove all filters and just be, you know, the first thing that comes to my mind or first thing that's in my heart, that's just me being
that's a great
real.
point.
That's not reality. The reality
That's
is
you being rude.
That's you being absolutely. That's you being selfish. So what we need, what we find here in this passage is that they were fully themselves. They were naked, but yet there was no shame attached to their nakedness. And what it breeds is a confidence that I don't need anyone else's approval. I don't need anyone else's permission. I found that at home. And where you find marriages that develop a sense of vulnerability and confidence between each other, that person is more equipped to kind of live their everyday life in the fullness of what God has, regardless what other people think, because I'm always confident that when I come home, I have somebody who's in my corner. I have someone who has my back. So yeah, that's where that vulnerability comes up. But I just, again, want to be really clear. Jess gets the best of me, but she unfortunately sees the worst of me. And because of her love and because we've come together, I am the most confident everywhere I walk because I know that I can be vulnerable, and it breeds a confidence in me.
And what I love so much about that picture is that's how God designed it.
Absolutely.
Like, we talk about it like it's this amazing, incredible thing, and it is, and I don't want to get ahead of this week's message, but it's so cool to think, like, this is the plan God had for us, that whether it's in the context of a marriage or even Adam before Eve, like, it wasn't good that he was alone, but he was also still, I'm assuming, naked and unashamed within the presence of God and in creation. This idea that we were made to be totally who we are and comfortable in that and not constantly trying to be someone else.
Absolutely. And what it requires is your person. Like in this picture with Adam and Eve, of course, he could be confident in every other area because he had his person. And I think that's critical.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else that you want to share with people around the topic of marriage?
Yeah, I think it's important even for people who maybe not in a marriage right now, but feel like maybe one day they will be in marriage, to consider what God's plan is and his blueprint is for marriage so that they can then themselves prepare for all the Lord would have for them when that season comes.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I actually meant to ask this and forgot. What would you say is the first step if there is someone out there struggling or a couple out there struggling and their marriage is not very good right now, it might not even be good enough right now, what would you say is the first step to moving out of that place?
Yeah, so it's a little tough to give one first step that meets everybody's
You mean
needs.
we're not all the same?
We're not even close. Not only are we not all the same, but it all depends how long some of this is festered too, right? Like if my kid just got cut, I might be able to put iodine on it, maybe a Band-Aid, call it a day. If that cut has been allowed to fester, there are so many deep-seated things that we may have to untangle and figure out. So you have to kind of have a barometer for where you are. And it all starts, no matter where this, where you are in the process, it does start with communication. There needs to be conversations, right? If you feel like the marriage isn't going to where you need it to be, or it's not even close to good, then maybe that requires conversation. Unfortunately, for some people, conversation is kind of a tough thing, and it's a symptom that there's a deeper problem. So even that statement of there needs to be conversation may require that there's a third person involved in that conversation, and counseling is a phenomenal first step for a lot of people. Some people are not there yet. They can just have open conversations. They feel good enough that they can move, and not every conversation leads to intense argument or belittling of one another. So again, it just really depends where people are, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's good advice. So not to move too quickly past it, but where are we heading next week?
Well, we're kind of heading for the fall.
Yay!
This great picture of husband and wife, and this great picture of identity, and then chapter 3, how it all went south. But also the picture of redemption, which is also found in chapter 3. I love that in Genesis. It doesn't allow you to go too far into the depth of sin to instantly introduce the plan of redemption. Those two things cannot be separated. They're kind of pushed together, and I love that. And that's where we'll sit.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we will be in our very good series, Genesis chapter 3, on Sunday morning at 10. We hope to see you guys there. In the meantime, have a great week.
See you guys later.